path to peace. Elevate your potential and become a beacon of positive change. Your path brought you here for a reason. Dive in, embrace the power of collective growth, and unlock the masterpiece of your life. The path to peace awaits.
Ready for Gaia?
How can we be resilient in a world that's growing more volatile by the day? How can we thrive?
Don't buy into the fear. It's about waking up.
Explore the world's largest library of conscious media with thousands of films and original programs.
People all over the planet are waking up.
Gaia is ready for you.
We can adapt our lifestyle to this time of extremes.
For the seekers,
Inside, he was able to detect the fetus of some creature. It is clear by scientists that it's something different. It is not human.
the wanderers,
In ancient times, the Atlanteans were said to have an advanced technology and power supply based on crystals.
the dreamers,
My dream is to help people understand how the universe operates so that each person can find their own unique purpose within the cosmic plan.
and the doers.
Thoughts can have an effect on your brain, your body, and your life. And I'm going to show you how to rewire your mind, your heart, and your body.
For those who dare to travel their own path,
Our potential to access the supermind is no longer simply theoretical. How can we hack our history to change our future?
We are meant to learn again and again in this life that truth does indeed set us free.
Now we are proposing a new beginning, a new history for human beings.
Alrighty. Welcome, and thank you all for being here. We were really looking to bring you all this show on Instagram tonight for the first time. StreamYard's letting that happen. It seems like they have a technical difficulty, so I'm not even sure if we're live on Instagram or not, but I'm grateful to be here, and we definitely are a go on LinkedIn and Facebook, and grateful that I could move really fast and get this out to you as quick as I could. And thank you, Ryan, for keeping everything moving. And want to say thank you to Gaia. The partnership with them is definitely awesome, and we continue to move things forward. Please go check out gaia.com/Sid, and you can find meditations and yoga classes and different things for you to do to enhance your practice and everything that's going on for you. And grateful for tonight, grateful for continuing as we look into December and we move into the next part of the Peace Program for everyone to access. You know, this is a curriculum that we've really worked on creating for everybody, and especially for the next generation as we talk about it tonight. And so I'm excited to bring that forward as we continue to look at the journey into peace right now. and what does that look like for everybody that's coming forward in so many ways. So grateful to bring Aaron and Liz up, and we'll go ahead and get it started. Welcome, welcome. You guys have to unmute, and thank you for being here. And what I want to say, this is a interesting part of the year to me. It was different for me as a parent when my children were no longer in school and I had to be like, okay, now it's time to really be a parent, full time, full day, all of those things. And just want to, hear you all on what's the perspective of how things move. Is what are the kids like in school at the end as they're about to be home for the holidays? And yeah, what's happening at your school today? What was it like? Liz, go for it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sid. And hi, Aaron. Great to be here again. I would say there's definitely a lot of excitement in the air. And, for me, I'm embracing and enjoying the excitement of the different holidays around this time and how different cultures really take honor of this time in the year. So, definitely a lot of excitement. And for us, we have 1.5 more days left before we go for break. So I don't think there's any slowing down until we get to that Wednesday afternoon. So that's what's going on for us.
Awesome. Aaron, how about you?
I would say that it's equally wild at my schools. I just have to go in tomorrow. I know some of my schools go in for Wednesday, some do not. It is definitely a high energy time right now. So just riding the wave to get through that in this moment.
Awesome. I remember these times, and everything was different. Obviously my children are no longer children. They're grown adults, and I'm grateful I'm not a grandparent yet. And they were, I mean, that was 28, one's 28, one's 26, and one's 23. So they definitely, it was a different time. And things are different now. You all have seen this world move through a pandemic, which I didn't have to do as a parent, which changed the dynamic of, all right, now we go from being in person to being on screens like we are now. It basically they've learned to watch TV even more so than we did when I was a child or my children. And so I'm curious, as the children now start to go back home with their parents. So what does that look like for a parent that's like, okay, now they're back home again and another shift in environment? What does it look like for the parents to start out with what peace can look like at home? Aaron, take it away.
So I'm really sure, or I'm certain in that it's got to look like a parent modeling it first. And I know I'm about to have both of my kids at home and be home with them. So filling the day with a balance of structure and, giving them space to do what they would like to do without, making a huge mess in the house and enjoying some of the fruits of the season. And so I know that, like, if I'm not modeling that piece first and foremost, that it's not really going to show up in any other way. So I have to have that awareness if I've stepped out of peace, and then a willingness and a grace for myself to move back into that. Otherwise, my kids are not going to have it. So it starts with me.
Yeah, I love that, because I mean that's a big part of where we are in this part of the peace program is learning how the reflection, right? How the reflection is happening, and it's happening because of what's going on inside of me, and then I see it on the outside, and it actually meets me exactly what I'm putting out is what I'm getting back. And so I like that you say that, especially with the parents. All of a sudden everybody's at home, and I remember when I was coaching football and I had an opportunity to go into we always had in the beginning of the year, we would have Fridays off in the morning so that we could take time to recover after 2 days and things like that as the seasons began to progress. And so what happened was I remember being at home and I created this game, and I'm going to make it quick, but created this game with my children to play the silence game. So at night, we would get everything ready for school the next day. And then when school came up, it'd be like, okay, we're going to move in silence so that your mom can have a good morning and you all can get out to the car and we'll be there before she ever gets there. And that created something different. And so for me, it was always like that. I love games. So it was, how can I create a game to make you get further along your journey that makes it easy? And kids love games. So if you call it a game and you start to play it like it's a game, for me, that was always a big deal of how to create that space. And so Liz, love to hear what your take is for the parents for the holidays.
Yeah, well, I loved what you guys were saying. I think the starting point for peace definitely comes from the adults in the family and the house. And that's true, really, whenever we're looking at peace, it starts with the individual. So we set the tone and build the foundation for those in our lives is something that I really believe. So I think it's important that when we want peace, we look at ourselves and see how we're contributing to that peace or not, and then how we can shift into the peace. And then I love too the sense of structure. I think, for children and adults as well, when we're in a routine and then all of a sudden we're out of it, it can feel a bit chaotic and at times, even a bit like uncomfortable in extreme, might even feel unsafe. It's like, well, what am I supposed to be doing right now? The day can feel suddenly like it's enormously long when it's just, a day off, as opposed to, oh, well, in the morning I do this, then I have lunch, in the afternoon I do this, and having those chunks of time. So it takes the guesswork out of things, can bring a lot of peace of mind, I think, to everyone.
And what are some games, Liz, that you like games?
I
What are
do like
some games and things that parents can get their children into that that keeps them, because kids are engaged at school, right? Like they're with their teacher, they're with the students, they're engaged in all these things. And now we take them and we put them home, and it's like, okay, who's engaging them? Especially like if you're a single kid in a house, now all of a sudden parents got to engage. So what's that really look like?
Yeah, I mean, Sid, I feel like you're the master of games, really. I think you could make anything fun. And I think that's kind of what comes up for me is that, growing up, we played so many games, different board games, active games. And so there's, tons to choose from. And as much as there are games that are already out there, I think the energy behind what we're already doing can be really fun or stressful. So, simple things like setting the table or, taking out the trash. Or I think of you, Sid, because I feel like you make things a friendly competition. So it's like any little thing is like, okay, yeah, I'm going to beat you. Okay, yeah, we're making the bed. Well, I'm going to make my side faster. Like anything can be gamified in that way. And it brings fun. I think another piece of it, though, too, is the connection. Games are fun to play, but if you think about, trying to do some of these activities on your own, such as making the bed, it feels a lot different when you're the only one who knows that you're making the bed versus when you're getting to enjoy that with someone else, whether it's a competition or just, celebrating that you've accomplished one thing for the day already. So sharing in those just basic everyday things with another person and sharing that connection.
I love that. I love that. Aaron, what do you got? Because you're at home you've got younger ones and you go to school. So what's happening at your house?
So we're going to engage in like really basic games, like puzzles. My sons will do jigsaw puzzles, and I'm in it for like the sorting aspect. I'm not so in it for the finding the place where the piece goes, but just myself being there and being a part of that helps to create that bond. And so the other thing that we love to do here, we love to play card games like Uno. We love Uno. And we also really love, there's this game that my grandmother taught me. It's called Kings in the Corner. And it's one that like I will play it forever and ever and ever. And there's they're not really complicated games. They're just, easy little card games. And I just really enjoy having those moments because it does create that connection, like Liz was saying. So that's what we'll do. And I'll structure it like you'll have your screen time and then it'll be not screen time. And then, like if we get a chance to go back to it, then great. But it'll be a balance of that for sure.
Right on. I used to do this game. I do love making things up. Well, my dad actually started this, and so it became something that actually helped my son move into being an artist. I would take something and just put it in the middle of the table. Like, here's a vase, here's a can, or whatever it might be. Here's a plant, and I just put it in the table and say, okay, everybody draw it. Now I can remember the first time that we really got into this. Sid was obviously the oldest, and then TD was in the middle, and Camille was the tiniest. So she started crying because she didn't like how hers looked, but that was okay. She had to learn that, which actually made her more competitive later on because she never wanted to have the bad picture. So it was all things work out the way they need to work out. But that was something that I did. And I think for me, I just had fun with being a parent. Like, I could let go of my phone. Phones weren't as popular as they are now, but I could let go of my phone and be with everybody and just, all right, let's make a game. Sometimes it was nap time. Like, you can watch a movie or go to sleep. That's just the way it was for me. Like, all right, this movie's going to watch you while I take a nap because I'm tired now as a parent with all the children that are running around in my house. Like, it was just like that. Nap time, everybody here. We watch Rush Hour probably 15, 20 times at least. They can give you all the quotes. They love it. And, they knew, okay, if we sit with dad for a minute, he's going to fall asleep and we can sneak out. If we like, there was all types of stuff. So good luck, parents that are at home and where you're going to be going. And Aaron, here's a question for you. How can one enter into a conversation? We're going to get a little deeper now, into a conversation that's deeper for parents, like all of a sudden, because I've heard some of these interesting things that kids be asking when Liz comes home, like those deeper conversations for the parents that their kids now at home, and they're like, hey, mom, what's the birds and the bees? How do you enter into those?
Oh man, I'm so glad you asked me this question as my kid is one of my sons is going through that first round of health class and learning about his body. And I always enter it with a giggle, like those kinds of things. I'll never forget the first time my older son started asking about anatomy and I just giggled at him. And was like, ask your dad. But then it turned into like, okay, I'm going to really have this conversation with my son because I want him to feel like he can come and talk to me about things. And one of the things I've always, said to my kids is like, you don't lie to your mom. And my husband will emphatically like disagree with this. He'll be like, and your dad. But I wanted to just create always this space, like this safe space for my kids to come and tell me things and know that I'm going to listen. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be a consequence if it's something that requires a consequence. But I always start with a giggle and then it might continue with some breath. But I think it's really just more of a willingness to be open and to really listen. And that's something that is a theme of chapter 2 in the Peace program, is this listen and be willing to listen from a different space. So that's where it starts for me, is that if I start with a giggle, then I've already put myself in that space of listening from a different space.
Awesome. Liz, what's your take?
Well, Sid, I feel like I heard the question one way and then you brought the birds and the bees in and I was like, hold on, what did he ask? So I'm going to need you to bring that back again one more time.
The question is, how do parents deal with the tougher questions at home? Like, you all have dealt with some of these things. So I'm trying to give parents that power to find a little piece as the birds and the bees or something else comes at them.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I think, what first comes to my mind is just the importance of really taking a step back from our own experiences. And as Aaron was saying, being in that state of listening. Oftentimes I'm faced with questions that in my mind seem really difficult. And then I will automatically sort of think of my own experience with that. So all of us have had experience in some way with birds and the bees. And if we think about having a conversation with someone around that who's a child, our world is massive. And so thinking about how to have that conversation, there's so many different details that we as adults might consider and think about. But then if we take a step back and think about, okay, who's this person in front of me that's asking this question? And they're being curious and kind of stepping into their own world, stepping out of our world. Has brought a lot of peace for me. So in psychology and in like therapeutic principles, we talk about this notion of reflective listening. And so if somebody's speaking to us and they're saying, oh, I have this really big question, what are the birds and the bees? Then rather than diving into a whole big answer, it's kind of like just reflective listening, or reflecting that question back is, oh, you're curious about the birds and the bees, and then hearing what they have to say in response to that. So kind of navigating their curiosity or whatever it might be that they're asking, that allows you to step into their shoes rather than trying to filter your own experience.
I love that. And my children didn't really ask a lot of questions when they were growing up. So I was fortunate in many ways that way, because I shared so much that there weren't a lot of questions to be asked. For me, I feel like that's partially why, in many ways, they didn't stray too far from the path, because I told them all of my mistakes. I allowed them to see, especially as they got older, there were things that wouldn't have been appropriate for them to hear when they were, 5, 6, 7, whatever. And then all of a sudden, when they got towards high school and they're getting close to leaving the house, it was like, okay, this is what it looked like for me. This is what it looked like to get in trouble for real. And these were the choices of the things that I was making. And you can choose differently. And I think that's so important, at least for me, when I was raising my children, was, okay, look at me. I'm just a guy, and I'm choosing to make different choices that allow my life to be peaceful, that allow me to move forward in that way. And so I just think that's important in parenting, to be real. This idea, it's almost like trying to pretend that you're Jesus when your children are going through things like you never did anything. And that part puts a child, to me, in the space of curiosity more than they actually even have to. Yet when I told my kids about some of the craziest of things, they were like, man, you were crazy. I don't want to do that. I don't want to get involved with that. I like keeping the house clean, because this stuff we get to live in paradise here. And when I would leave my boys at home, 10 and 14-year-olds, and I'm down in Nicaragua, they had to be empowered to make sure that I came back to a house that was still standing. So I told them everything, every possibility. And I think for me, when I look at a lot of these parents that are in the struggle with their child, they haven't yet taken the time to say, okay, one is discipline. Discipline. What does discipline look like? Doing what you're told, because that's where things have to move from. This idea that kids get to make choices, a kid doesn't know how to make a proper choice. That's why they're kids. They really don't. And when I say proper choice, try putting $100 bill on the table with your 3-year-old and a couple cookies and ask them to pick. They're probably going to pick the cookies, even though they could go buy a hell of a lot more cookies with the $100 bill. But they picked the cookie because they don't know the difference. And I think that's important. Parents right now, there's very few parents actually parenting, like doing what parents need to do for their child. That's why we got all these children running amok in so many ways. And so I'm just curious how you all see that. Aaron, go ahead. Take it away.
Well, I was going to add a layer on to our birds and bees talk. It's important for me to know what my kid already knows. So for me to pause and say, hey, what do you already know about this? So that way, and I create this space of like, well, how much do I really need to tell you? Because if you already know some of the details, let me, set you straight on some of those details. And so that's an important part of parenting for me when it comes to, having those conversations. And I've got a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old too. So I've got one who's, starting to embark on girls and, like figuring out that dynamic. And we have made it clear to him, if you have questions, come ask your dad and I, because your friends don't know things. Like your friends are in as much of the dark as you are. So come ask us. Don't go to the internet. The internet, has like too much information. Let us like talk to you about it and like have a real conversation. I'm grateful that I had parents who were in medicine and were scientists and were very like matter of fact about things, because that kept me from being like, I had a mom who had a textbook with all of like the STDs, and she just flipped through the pages and she was like, and this is this STD. This is what happens when you fool around too much. And then she'd flip to another page. And of course, in those textbooks, it's like all the worst case scenarios. So, like, yes, I was able to make really informed decisions because my parents gave me a lot of information that was pretty direct. So just having that spot and that space to have those really good open conversations, I think is an important part for the decision-making and parenting process.
Liz?
Sid, thank you. I'm thinking about the Oreo and the money, and I'm like, kudos to the kid for taking the Oreo, because that is their like priority in their life at that moment. I think choices, like we all have the power of choice, and it's up to us as individuals to have that agency over what we need, what's best for us at that time. Um, So I'm like thinking of this little 3-year-old taking the money and being like, oh, I'm going to open up my checking account. And like, yeah, maybe that's cool. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's what they need. And maybe not. And I think um, choice is just an interesting topic that you bring into the conversation, Sid, because I feel like as children, they're developing the capacity to choose. And some of it is conscious and some of it's not. And even as adults, that's really powerful in our life of choosing. And I think the more I've gone down this path of peace and consciousness and awareness, I've realized how powerful choice is in my life. And I didn't always see that. And as we're talking about, the holidays coming up and certain traditions and how we want to honor the days, that we have now compared to maybe how we have in the past, the power of choice is there for me. And with that comes joy, with that comes peace. So it's just an interesting part that you bring into the conversation, Sid, of choice. And for children, I feel like they're developing that. And if they choose the Oreo over the money, then that's okay. Not sure if you
Yes
can
and
see
no.
this.
Now,
Getting a
what
call
I'm
from you.
saying with that is different, because the child at home who gets to choose everything they get to do doesn't really have the ability to choose what's best for them in the long run. That Oreo cookie and $100 bill, just an example. We can make it $10,000. They're still probably going to just choose the Oreo cookie. And my point being is that the child is not equipped for that. So when I look at these things that you all are dealing with at schools that never even came up really at all at school, because like, here's one example. When I was in high school, we had a lot of my friends, I never did, but we had a lot of friends of mine that dressed up like women for trick or treat. They're all married. It is what it is. They just dressed up like women because They thought it was cool. I never thought that was cool. With and now and it's okay, but I never thought that was cool. My point being is this: a child at these young ages, with these conversations that are happening in your reality as teachers, they don't have the ability to make choices at these younger ages. And so I think it's important for parents to help guide them to choices that make sense in the moment as a child, which isn't anything in these extremes that somehow is happening on the teacher's watch that's in the system now. So that's what I'm talking about. Is it's like, no, the child doesn't get to choose all the time when to go to bed, because the child doesn't. Hey, if there's something exciting, I'm just going to stay up, not knowing that your child is, if they're shorty, part of the reason why they may be a shorty is because they don't get any sleep. You don't get to watch yourself grow. So I've got to actually choose to help my child get to bed so they can actually, that things can work on the inside like they do scientifically, biological inside of myself, to let those things happen. Can't just choose them for themselves. Like, even to try to joke into it or anything, for me, it's not it. Like, yes, you have to, as a parent, make choices for your children. That's how it's equipped. Otherwise, a baby wouldn't even recognize how to get to being fed without an adult. Initially, they have to even be taught that, like, brought to whatever the food is. They don't get to do that. We have to have people stepping up and doing their part that actually allows our children to grow. I look at a lot of these other countries where, yep, it may seem like what the parents say is just the way it is. Heck, it's in most of the people's book that they like to follow. Honor thy mother and thy father. Like, well, how do they say that? Because you got to actually do your parenting, which I hope that people are hearing this so they can start doing their parenting. Georgia heard it, and that's why Georgia has a $50 tax on your extra on your bill if your kids are sloppy in the restaurant. Go to Georgia. They'll help you parent. What you got? What you got? I'm trying to fire this up a little bit.
Yeah, I like your fire here, Sid. And I think that for me, like as I'm listening, it comes back to a sense of shared values. That if there's not a sense of shared values, then it creates this kind of dissonance. And the example that I have now, I teach in private schools, but I send my children to public school because I believe in public school. And I am also a product of public school. So for me, what I'm drawing upon in this moment is that at school, at my children's school, which is public school, there's not a lot of talk about, like they talk about a values code, but then they don't really go into like, what does integrity mean? What does, respect look like? So whereas in the private school, it's very clearly spelled out. Like these are the three things, I'm thinking of one school in particular, they have three different things that they recite each day. And, like they all start with the same letter and they go through in that way. And they talk about, and they say like, after they say that word, they say what it means and what it looks like. And then it's the next word and then the next word. And so having that sense of like community through values is an important part, and having, others that share that value, those values with you in the same community helps to build that bridge and create a good foundation for parenting. And I don't know that exists, and I'm not everywhere, all over the place. It's as something that I see as a missing piece of the puzzle to create more peace from school to home and home to community. So that's just one of the things I see as a missing piece.
Got it. Liz, you got anything for this?
Yeah, I'm not going to match your fire, Sid, but I am going to respond to your conversation regarding the choice, because I feel like that is like a big concept that can look a lot different in many ways. So to me, when children are given the opportunity to choose, then it helps them to develop things like decision making and planning. It helps them to develop a sense of agency in their life, independence, and those sort of skills. However, I'm not saying that it's appropriate for them to make all decisions. And I do believe that there's time for discipline and time for, rules to be followed. And there's a balance to be had with the opportunity for them to decide, do you want to watch this show or do you want to watch that show, is what I'm speaking on. So I'm not sure where the example of the Oreo and the money comes from, but I think, it could look very different if it's a very well off family and they're not really in need of that money. That's not a big deal. Whereas if it's a family that $100 could pay the grocery bill for the week, okay, that's a different story. But I do think it's important for children to develop appropriate choices and the ability to make those decisions.
Well, I think what I'm getting at is appropriate choices. They aren't equipped at a young age to make an appropriate choice. They just aren't. Not even, they don't have the equipment. They haven't had the life experience to make an appropriate choice. One would be, okay, kid goes and grabs a hot thing off the stove. Another one could be, I remember my brother unscrewing the top of a light that you put in the windows for the holidays and put it in his mouth and shocked his 2 front teeth out. He didn't have the appropriateness to make the choice to keep the stick out of his mouth. Now, my mom wasn't really watching. Hate to say this, Mom. Hate to throw you under the bus. But she wasn't really watching. And so my brother ended up with 2 front teeth missing for 3 years. Like, they aren't equipped for that. If you actually think they are, that's part of the problem. Yes, teach them to make choices for themselves. You like red marbles or blue marbles? Okay, why do you like blue ones? Awesome, that's great. This television show versus this television show. I'm not sure, unless it's been evaluated first, that the child has the appropriateness to say, oh, this is the better show, because they don't know. They haven't seen the words. They haven't seen the images in the background. They don't know what's actually being put in their brain and how it's working. They actually have to be taught. I was taught at a very young age. I think we were seventh grade, when they took magazines, said, bring your magazines in. And they actually showed us in the magazine that the words hidden said, spelled S-E-X, in case you got the kids over here. They spelled all these different types of things so that they could inundate your brain so that you thought like this. And when it comes to education for me, because this is one of those things, I'm really passionate about education. I came from a mom that taught calculus for 29 years and all the things that she taught, my dad taught, and Liz, you have the same thing. And we're all 3 of us. We've all come from those backgrounds. So I'm very passionate about making sure that our education becomes teach people how to think. Right now, we're teaching people how to be indoctrinated into a lineup. And this is, oh, you get to choose. No, you're not choosing, because they're already making a brainwave in all of our children. They're just doing that. So we actually have to teach them how to think by being there to think with them in the process. Otherwise, you're just turning your kids over to the TV, to the marketing, to all the things that say, okay, we're just going to funnel you into the same crap that right now we're getting funneled. Our children are getting funneled into this stuff that says, no, this isn't living. This isn't adding to the value of our children becoming better than where we are right now. We're just teaching them, just move the way we want you to move. No, that ain't it. You got to learn how to think. And that to me is, yes, I'm fired up about that, because it's like, no, parents, start parenting. Stop turning it over just to the teachers. Teachers need to teach. Not, I'm that person that's like, I came from football. If you're not a great parent personally, then God should bring your kids back. Bring them back. Because if you shouldn't even have gotten them in the first place. And if you're a teacher and you're not doing your job to teach, then you should be fired. That's how it was in football. We got fired if you lost. We are losing and nobody's accountable for it. And it's just nasty to me. That's what I got. That's the word for me. Nasty.
Well, I can tell you one of the biggest holes in education is a lacking of the arts when philosophy, psychology, music, art, when all of those things are being whittled away, we're losing those platforms and those spaces where kids are taught how to think and reason. One of the things that I've discovered is that kids can't make logical connections. So today at school, I did an activity with the kids, and it was about, like, they had pictures of things, and they had to, each picture represented a Christmas carol. And so, like, some of them, the kids were like, what is this? And some, like, I realized, like, this is a very old thing. It's been out in the world for a while, like, even since I was a kid, and I'm realizing I'm dating myself by, like, mentioning this. But, like, I had to help them with some of it, but the things that were very obvious, like, it was like right over their head. So if they're not given those opportunities to, have those arts, those moments of, like, oh, look, here's my light source, and now I have to understand that this means that the shadow is going to cast this way, and creating those logical connections. Or, like, oh, if I do this in my musical instrument and then it makes a bad sound, well, if I keep doing it over and over again, I'm not creating that pathway in my brain that says I have to physically do something different. So lacking those constant, and, like, they will say, like, oh, we incorporate songs into our learning of geography. That's great, but that's entertaining the kids. That's not really creating those opportunities for logical connections, like the arts and philosophies, and some of the sciences, I think, do, like, leave that space. But now, like, we're in spaces of, like, oh, it's too much liability to do these experiments and things, and on and on and on. So it's just this constant whittling away of these opportunities that would create that space for logic and decision making and growth and thinking on an independent level. And I'm fortunate enough to have been able to have been in the International Baccalaureate program, which really made you, like, think next level, like, creating these higher spaces of thinking. So I'm grateful that I had that opportunity. And I just know that all of education should be based on this model. It shouldn't just be a few that get to participate in it.
Liz, I'm going to give you the last word on this one, if you got something, and then we're going to move to this last part that I know so many children actually deal with in the holidays.
Yeah, I don't have anything. I'm good, thanks.
Awesome. So here's the last part that I want to talk about is, often children experience a lot. Some children experience more than others, like the loss of a parent, divorces in couples, and, parents splitting, and all the different things that children deal with that some children don't. Like, it's just, they walk through life and they're with their parents, they have their grandparents, and it goes all the way through. And that's great. It's great either way, really. Yet I'm curious as to what can parents do that are still with those situations where one parent's gone out of the house for whatever reason, and what are some things that can help in that way? We'll start with you, Liz, since you're the counselor.
Yeah, I think first is just valuable to consider what will be different, what's going to be the change, and how it's going to impact those people who are in the family. Little details and bigger things, being if, someone is gone, what that might look like logically, what it might feel like emotionally, and really just being in a state of acceptance around whatever shows up. Having communication around all of that and giving time to process. I will always remember the first Thanksgiving after my dad passed away, and just looking around the room and realizing that he wasn't there. And when that occurred, it hit me like a ton of bricks. However, I knew that would be the case. It didn't take it wasn't a big aha to say that he wasn't going to be there, like he would be somewhere else that day. I knew that intellectually, but emotionally I didn't know that. So just, discussing some of those things that might be different, giving time for it to process, letting go of, feeling like, oh, it's a holiday. It should be this way. It should be that way. I should be happy. Letting go of those shoulds and being in that state of acceptance. And then considering what might be positive in the change. I think that COVID really gave us this gift that it was kind of like a reset for some of these traditions and holidays, and kind of allowed things to be a redo, start over, because we had that time where things were frozen. And now it's like, okay, well, what are we going to choose to do? How are we going to choose to move forward? So, what is it that we can control? Who do we really want to surround ourselves with? And then, what can we be grateful for about the change?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your experience of your dad. And I'm curious because we got to go to a funeral. I mean, I didn't go to very many funerals growing up. That wasn't part of my space. I mean, and even though people passed, my parents, that wasn't necessarily where we went as children. Just wasn't, his grandparents passed and all those different things, and yet it was different. I was taught differently about moving on to the next transition from being in this body, that it was meant to be celebrated. And so it was just always different for how I saw it for many people that were taught, like, this is a loss. This is an experience that you're just going to be grieving. You're going to go through all these different things, and that's okay too. Yet I'm curious, especially Liz, with the child that we went to her mom, I believe's funeral. And what does that look like for that parent? What have you noticed? What happens with the kid that parents can be aware of to look at with that child?
Well, what comes to mind would be the stages of grief, which is pretty a well-known phenomenon, but just the variety of different emotions that can come up, and being okay with whatever those are that show up. So, the denial. So it's normal to feel that sense of denial that no, this didn't happen. And then the anger, the bargaining, um, depression, acceptance, and then feeling that state of hope and joy moving forward, and remembering that in a pure love of gratitude way. All of that is okay. It's such a range of emotion, and I think that for an adult it's important to consider that for the child, that if they're seeing them in one state, that it's not necessarily a problem, and helping them to move through them is just a process of being with them. And it might go from one day, one moment to the next, feeling very different. But that's okay. That's their journey, and then honoring the individual adult's journey too. Alongside that, might look the same. It might look different, but yeah, it's just an individual journey.
Aaron, do you have anything to add?
When I think about this, I just think about the leveling of expectation. I had last year actually a couple of students whose mom passed away suddenly, like in their sleep or in her sleep. And the shift that took place for those kids and the way that the community showed up for them and just created this foundation of support for these kids to continue to move forward and go through their grieving process. I mean, there were days that the kids showed up to my class and they just crumbled and melted into me, and I was there to catch them and to hold them and say, okay, it's okay for you to be sad in this moment. How much time do you need? And, they would bring themselves back together. But leveling on my end, leveling the expectation and saying, okay, maybe in the past it looked like one thing, but now in this moment, it's very different. And I'm going to show up for you in a very different kind of way. So that's what comes up for me in this moment when I think about, kids who have one parent, whether it's, they're overseas or the other parent is, crossed over to the other plane. That's what, just leveling that expectation.
Yeah, I agree. Giving someone, just having conversation and opening up the space to be safe for the child to speak. And I also, we've talked about the transition to death, and Rich is really, it's not death, it's life after death. And really, it's, for me, I know it as that. Like this, take my arms off, I'm still Sid. Take my legs off, still Sid. Take this meat suit away, Sid, the essence of me is still here. So with that being said, there is life after this transition from this body to where I'm going. Just is. It'll always be here, the essence of me, and it's eternal. My body is eternal. When I come back from wherever I may go, if I come back, all it does is come back together, and here I am again in a slightly different way, but I'm still here again. Everything comes out of the air. All the elements are composed right in here to be me. So I get that we've been taught different things about that, but that's the way I know it. So for me, it becomes a lot easier work with, okay, when I leave, I leave. If I come back, I come back. And that conversation, I remember that conversation being with my son, my middle son. And I said, all right, I think he was always around. It was towards the end of his high school years. And it was like, all right, he's always around. He only had like a couple classes, and then he'd be around. And finally one day we were going somewhere, and I was like, hey man, what are you going to do when I die? Like, what's going to happen? And he looked at me straight, stone cold, said, well, I'm going to keep on living. And I was like, oh. And I kind of sat back like, hold up. And he was like, oh, no. I'm going to miss you, but I'm going to keep living. And I think those conversations that are had, let's go of it needing to be this whole thing in case it comes. Because I've had that conversation, they've at least gotten one step closer to being okay if something had to happen like that. I think that's just so important to have those conversations. And the same thing goes for, it's different, but all of a sudden you go through the first Christmas, the first Hanukkah, all the different things, Thanksgiving, whatever it may be. You go through the first holiday where one parent's in another house and another parent's in another house. I've done that one too. And when you do that to that child, it can feel like death. Like that's a death of something for them. But actually on the other side of that is a whole nother opportunity for living. So conversations to me are just so very important to have, and getting into it with everybody. Awesome. So what's your takeaway? Aaron, go for it. You're on mic. What's your takeaway for tonight?
My takeaway is, creating this space of conversation for opportunities for growth. And ultimately, those opportunities are going to create peace and create a new foundation for elevation. So that's where I am and what I'm taking with me today.
Awesome. Liz.
Yeah, I think peace in the next generation, the takeaway for me is that it starts with me as an individual. And there's, I think, a lot of power with that perspective of it just starting with each of us as individuals and letting it ripple out to all of those of the next generation.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you for continuing to have these conversations that allow people to find a different place of peace in every way. And happy holidays to both of you. Liz, I will see you throughout the holidays. And Aaron, have really a great holiday season and enjoy all of it, especially with your children. Thank you both. And as we begin to head out, I want to make sure that we are aware that lesson 11 this week, lesson 11, and it's important to take these lessons as we talk about them and just implement them. See how you can walk with them throughout the week and then get into the next one. And however far you get, when you become aware of something new, that is a great thing. It's a great thing to continue to move forward. So lesson 11 is the first step forward. Take the first step forward. Look inside of yourself and say, okay, what's going on in here that is causing it to show up out here? It's all happening inside of me. And that's why the world shows up the way it does for me. If my children are happy, it's happening in here. I'm seeing them there. I've created that space. Go with your children over the holidays and see what you're creating in here and allow it to come forward for them, for everybody in your life, and continue to have a beautiful, beautiful life and a very, very happy holiday season. We will see you soon. Peace.